Michael Smerconish on 1210. We were trying to figure out exactly what time he gets up in the morning. He says 3 o'clock. And I said, God did not intend man to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I think that's the credo for every morning man in the world. A while back, as you know, Michael is a lawyer, and I'm told that his calling card had Michael Smerconish, lawyer / talk show host. And then he signed a very, very lucrative contract with 1210, and now he lists as Michael Smerconish, talk show host / lawyer. So it all depends on where things are coming from. He's a very active guy. Mark Howard, who had to just go, had to leave, he had Michael as a guest on the Sunday morning show on Channel 6 for many, many times. He's on CNN, on cable, on Sundays. I heard him take over for Bill O'Reilly nationally a couple of weeks ago when Bill was on vacation on the radio network. And he wakes you up every morning, 12:10 on the dial, as the morning talk show host. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest speaker, Mr. Michael Smerconish.
Thank you very much, Bill. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a privilege for me to be here to say hello to so many of you. I've been here for about an hour and have enjoyed hearing many, many stories exchanged, which is a wonderful thing because we all have our stories, I think, in this room as to how we came to be involved in this particular business. And I'd like to share a couple of my own with you. I'm sitting here at lunch and I'm thinking, how did it really begin for me? In 1977, I was a sophomore in high school out in the suburbs at Central Bucks West, the football powerhouse, and I was leading somewhat of a typical existence for a teenager at that time. I was playing football, although not too well, rookie for the CB West, which is the perennial state football champion. And working odd jobs and getting ready, hopefully, to go on to college thereafter. And in the summer, I had a job at a local pool and patio store. It was called Mountain Lake Pool and Patio, and it was owned by some folks who lived in my neighborhood, the Stockles. In the summer, I would deliver patio furniture for them, and I would deliver chlorine and pool supplies. And I remember reporting for work when I was 16 years old, and the fellow who owned the business said to me, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to deliver chlorine to Larry Kane's house. This was awfully exciting for me at the time because Larry Kane was, a big celebrity. Now, the business, Mountain Lake Pool and Patio, was owned by the Stockel family, and I had a buddy of mine, his parents owned it. He was Mike Stockel Jr. So the two of us jumped in this panel truck, and I was there in my CB West, gym shorts and a cut-off T-shirt, probably from some concert that I had seen at the Spectrum. And all that we had with us was a 3x5 card that said, deliver bucket of chlorine to Larry Kane, and it had an address in Rydell. And we had, of course, the chlorine in the back of the van as well. We had one other thing along for the ride, and that was one of those cameras that had just come out at the time where you push the button and it would eject the photograph, and you'd have to wait 30 seconds, and then you peel it off, and then there was your picture. So with the chlorine, the 3x5 card, and the camera, we headed for Rydell. We knocked at the door, and we were disappointed that Larry Kane himself didn't answer the door. It was about 11 o'clock in the morning, and Larry was then, of course, doing the 11 o'clock news for someone, maybe even New York, if I thought this through. But it was a woman who worked for him in a domestic capacity. And we said, we're here, we have chlorine for Mr. Kane. She said, well, you just put it out behind the pool. And thinking quickly, I said, oh no, we're not permitted to leave the chlorine unless he signs for it. And looks at me as if, well, what the hell is he going to sign? The 3x5 card, of course. So she said, well, are you sure? Can I sign? No. I responded, no one can sign for this chlorine except Larry. So she goes inside, there's about a 5 or a 10 minute delay, and all of a sudden, here he comes, and he was in a T-shirt, I'll never forget this, a pair of cutoffs, the fly was down, and the hair was disheveled. And he said, what is it that I have to sign? We put the 3x5 card in front of him, and before he could say Jack Rabbit We each threw our arms around him, swapped hands with the camera, and had a photograph taken with Larry King. He slammed the door, and we drove home. And we get back to Mountain Lake Pool and Patio that day, and the photographs are terrific, meaning they developed. And we hanged them over the cash register. Following day, Larry King calls. I don't know what he needed on this particular day. And my buddy answers the phone. He's, "Oh, Mr. Kane." He said, "You know, it's me, Mike Stockwell Jr. from yesterday. You remember we took your picture? Well, you'll be happy to know it's now hanging above the cash register." To which Larry King replied, "That's great, kid. Just get your father." So 10 years thereafter, the year was now 1987. It was election day. Frank Rizzo, Wilson Good 2. 8 o'clock, the polls close. And Larry Kane is now at Channel 10. He's doing the election night coverage, and who's the first person that he puts on camera to be a talking head for the Rizzo campaign? It was me. And I, of course, didn't want to then tell him, I'm the guy who delivered the chlorine, who took your picture all those years, got to fly down, hair disheveled. But when I think about my own trail that sort of got into this business, is filled with stories like that. And I don't know if those sort of stories take place in other parts of the country. I do know that they take place in the city of Philadelphia, and it's responsible for me doing what it is that I'm doing today, whatever that happens to be. I never set out to be a broadcaster. I was bitten by the ego of it after having been a fill-in talk show host at the old WWDB. Because I had these remarkable political experiences at a very early age, and one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I was being called upon for my political commentary. I mean, I had that experience with Larry Kane in 1977, and I already had the political bug to some extent. I'd written letters to Frank Rizzo when I was in a 6th grade class at the Doyle Elementary School, and I left Central Bucks West and I went to Lehigh University in 1980. And if you think back to 1980, 80 was Ronald Reagan and George Bush running against Jimmy Carter and Walter Mondale. And I had 2 great experiences in the spring of my senior year in high school. I met George Bush when he came to the Shrine of Chenstohova in Doylestown. And this was the first time that I would cast a ballot. I was now 18 and registered to vote. And I came home and I said to my folks, I've just met George Bush. His slogan at the time was, "A president we won't have to train." And I said, this guy, I can remember this so well, this guy is presidential timber, as if I knew what, presidential timber was. A week later, Ronald Reagan came to the Italian Market on 9th Street. And I'd been tipped off by a friend who worked for Reagan that at 1:50 in the afternoon on a particular day, he'd end up at Esposito's Meat Market at 9th and Washington. So with my buddy, we went down, we skipped school, and we went to meet Ronald Reagan in the heart of the Italian Market. Hadn't wanted to take the flash attachment with us on the train from Doylestown into the old Reading train shed. Consequently, when we took his picture, we didn't have the Larry King camera, we had the newfangled Pocket Instamatic, and it never developed. And we were heartbroken. Reagan came back a few months later at the Bellevue in the Rose Garden, and with a purloined name tag, pre-9/11 obviously, I was able to get into this fundraiser for Ronald Reagan, met the man. So I'm now fired up, going off to college in Bethlehem at Lehigh, thinking, mistakenly, that everybody else is excited about politics. And I arrive on campus and I put together a club that I call Lehigh University Youth for Reagan Bush. And I try to register voters and hand out literature, and no one cares. And I'm a freshman and I don't know better, so I came up with a strategy, and the strategy for me was that I would have a keg party. Not just any keg party, I would have a keg party for the multitude of Reagan Bush supporters on campus. Now, think about this. 1980, the fall, big year for people from Philadelphia and the Philadelphia area, particularly October 21, 1980. Joe Pellegrino, gotta have some significance to you. Phillies win the World Series on the exact same night that I throw the keg party for the Reagan Bush supporters. And literally no one, And I'd like to say 5 people, I mean, no one, but me, 3 half kegs of beer show up for the Reagan-Bush party. Now, I am then living in a dormitory at Lehigh called Taylor Hall. It's funny to me today because when the Eagles are in summer camp at Lehigh, they stay in Taylor. Taylor today is beautiful. Taylor then was 150 guys. 150 guys who were brutal to one another. There were no cell phones. Nobody had a computer. You didn't have a phone in your room. There was one phone for all 150. And it took divine intervention for you to get a competent phone message. And that's why it was a miracle that a few days after the disastrous keg party and right before the 1980 general election, I am told that there's a phone call for me. And I pick up the phone and a guy badly, mispronounces my name, which I'm used to. And he said, is this Michael Smerconish? And I said, well, who wants to know? And he said, well, I'm looking for the fellow who's the chairman of Lehigh University Youth for Reagan and Bush. So my only, endeavor at that time was the cake party. I think I'm getting pranked. So I said, well, who's calling? And he said, well, this is Dan Sullivan, and I'm with Ambassador George Bush. I said, yes, sir. As a matter of fact, this is Michael Smerconish. I said, I am the chairman of the club. How can I help you? Turns out that George Bush was coming to Bethlehem Steel a few days later, and they desperately needed volunteers to unload the luggage from the plane, to escort the media, to drive the motorcade cars. I hung up that hall phone, I ran down the hall, I knocked on the door of communist, liberal, independent, Democrat, didn't matter, and I said, hey, how'd you like to work for George Bush? My whole freshman hall took off for about 3 days. We worked on the visit. It came off without a hitch, and when George Bush flew out of ABE that day, we all lined up on the tarmac, shook his hand. I remember that the elevators had given out at the Sheraton in Allentown the night before. People like to say, well, he carried the bags for. I really carried the bags for this guy up 8 flights of stairs in Allentown. So my life has been a never-ending series of these sort of good fortune kind of stories, because if I fast forward a few years from that, I was nominated by George Bush to be the undersecretary in HUD when I was 29 years old to run all federal housing in Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, and Washington, D.C. And a lot of people wondered, how did he get that job at that age? Frankly, it was a pretty good question. I wonder myself sometimes. In the end, it came down to my application and the application of someone else. And the decision maker was a person who I knew from the old advance days. Because after I did work on that particular George Bush visit, I ended up getting tapped to plan the logistics of his personal appearances across the country and then around the world. I flew to Oslo, Norway with George Bush, Brussels, Belgium. They started me off with Butler, Pennsylvania. Then it was Stamford, Connecticut. Then it was El Paso, San Diego. The destinations got better and better and better. So the net effect of these really extraordinary political experiences was that I got the call to do some commentary by, of all people, Larry Kane, for whom I had delivered the chlorine that decade earlier. And that's where it really began for me. I was smitten with being, in front of the camera. And after doing the television work for Channel 10 as a talking head, I was asked to do some commentary for WWDB in a radio context, and I loved it. And I then was the fill-in person, and I'm sure this will make sense to everybody in this room. If it were Super Bowl Sunday, Dom G would take off, of course, and I would get the call. Would you like to work Super Bowl Sunday? Or Thanksgiving Day. There was no way Susan Bray was going to work on Thanksgiving Day, so I would get the nod. Or Christmas Eve. And one thing sort of progressed to the other, where it became not only that I was the 6th man on the court, as I like to think, but they eventually said, well, you do a Sunday night show. That way you can protect your legal practice. And I did. And then DQ passed away. You all remember Dominic Quinn. And when DQ passed, I was given his Saturday and Sunday morning show, Sunday morning as a lead-in to Sid Mark. And I loved it. Was completely smitten by it, had a falling out with DB because of that whole infomercial business. ended up coming to, the old CAU, now 12:10 a.m., and have sort of moved from one slot to another. Saturday mornings to in the afternoon for first an hour, and then 2 hours, then 3 hours in the afternoon, and now finally in the morning. I want to give you a feel for just some thoughts that I have about the program that I'm trying to do now, and then perhaps there'll be some questions that I can respond to, and I want to also recognize a special guest in the audience. I've had some interesting experiences since doing afternoon drive as well as morning drive. For example, was in Israel a year ago in the midst of the Intifada and did my radio program for a whole week from the Jerusalem Post. Great experience. George W. Bush called me when I was doing a remote on the night that he was elected president. As a matter of fact, Grace Blazer, who's our program director and is here, I remember this well. We were at Ruth's Chris in Center City, and she said to me, "George Bush is on line 3. And I thought it was a prank call. I thought it was a Howard Stern, Baba Booey kind of a thing. But what do? You take the call. It turned out it really was him calling because there were 2 hours left in the election in Pennsylvania and the East Coast, and he needed that extra push, which we were not able to give him in retrospect. A month ago, went down to the White House and did my program and interviewed Colin Powell and Andy Card, the Chief of Staff, and Tom Ridge and so forth. Yesterday from the Pentagon with Donald Rumsfeld. Great experiences. But nobody ever stops to talk to me about things that I said politically. No one, if I'm walking down Walnut Street or I'm in my own neighborhood, will say to me, your thoughts on Middle East peace, they're so insightful. It just doesn't happen. The subjects that seem to resonate with people, they'll say to me, hey, your daughter, did she ever go back to summer camp? Or they'll stop me and they'll say, we're a white light family also. They're making reference to shows that I've done about the everyday that seem to have far more of an impact than the majority of the days when I'm there, either in the afternoon or in the morning, and trying to be so serious about the headlines of the day. A few years ago, our daughter went to summer camp for the first time. She was 9 years old. And she was supposed to be there for 2 weeks, and we didn't hear from her for about 5 days. And then all of a sudden, one manila envelope arrived, and inside of it were 5 letters written sequentially every day that she'd been there. You remember Alan Sherman? Camp Granada, hello Butter, hello Butter. Straight out of Camp Granada. And each was worse than the previous letter. I hate the place, rescue me, bring me home. They were all signed SWAT, sealed with a tear. So we received these letters, and I came in on the radio and I said, in passing, our daughter's at camp. We just got these letters. It's unbelievable. We don't know what to do. Well, the phone lines all lit, and they were in 2 camps. The guys all called, and they said, at camp, there was always a kid like yours. And you ought to make her tough it out. Otherwise, she's going to be scarred for life. And then the women would call, and the women had the completely opposite point of view, which was, A, it's outrageous that you've told this story publicly. That was the first thing they wanted to tell me. Secondly, they would say, shame on you that you've not already gone to rescue her. She's going to be scarred for life. On another occasion, close to Christmas, I mentioned in passing, coming back from a commercial break, and I'm sure that I had a very heavy message politically to deliver to the audience, and just as a means of getting there said, after the show tonight, I'm going to stop at the local firehouse, we're going to buy our Christmas tree, hope we don't overpay for it, seems like the price is going up and up and up every year, and you know what, when we get home, I would really like to put those big, fat, colored Christmas lights on the thing. Because something has happened to me where along the way you make a little bit of money, you grew up as a colored light person, and now you're a white light household. Pretty much all that I said. Then I went back to the politics. The politics didn't make the phone light that night. The 14 telephone lines were all people who wanted to debate the colored lights. And, you should go back to your roots, or I'm a white light family, and how dare you say that about us? There's no pretension in our white lights. I guess the point of my story is that it's a never-ending quest for what really is on people's minds. And it might be the political issues, despite the fact that that doesn't seem to be the thing that, if I'm creating any great radio, I don't know that it's in that realm. I think that more often than not, it's in the everyday life experience that you can come in, that you can relate. It started this morning show, Labor Day. It's still in its infancy. And at a time, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, like a lot of other states, was altering the blood alcohol limit for DUI, taking it from a 0.1, I guess, down to a 0.08. People were sending me emails, and they would say, you can drink NyQuil, and you could blow a 0.08. And others would say to me, you can go out and get rip-roaring drunk, and you can still be secure with that reading. So we brought in, one of the first few weeks that I was doing morning drive, we brought in a state trooper with a breathalyzer machine and drank on the air. I wasn't going to drive home that day. I had a martini at 5:30 with nothing else on my stomach. And by 6 a.m., I had blown the 0.08, the 0.1, I'd blown through everything. And I still had sufficient wit about me to know that if I had another martini, I could never have finished that show, and it would have gotten ugly. But it was now that show is a show that people will ask me about. They'll pull me aside as if I'm an authority on the subject at a social occasion, and they'll say, how much can I drink? How the hell do I know? The state trooper was with me. So it's been a good ride for me so far. I think that the morning show represents a new opportunity for me. I think we're close to getting the formula that that's needed to make it happen. It's sort of a sea of syndicated talent these days. And then you've got guys like me in the morning and Dom G in the evening trying to bring to you that local flavor. You're not going to be able to tune in, and they're terrific, these syndicated talents, but you're not going to be able to tune in and hear from them about the controversy of MTV coming into the city of Philadelphia and the unions giving them a workout, so much so that they pack their bags and they leave. That's what I think I'm able to bring to the table that's lacking out there. And there's not always something like that in the news, but I'm always looking for it. So a combination of the local headline, the everyday life, whether it's the camp or the colored Christmas lights, that's what I'm banking on in terms of making it happen. I had an interesting experience last April 1st. Think about that date, ladies and gentlemen. April 1st of last year, I had a very special guest on my program. Is a member of Congress, not a guy who gets a lot of attention, probably not a household name that you would recognize, not in that class of Rostenkowski or the other national players. This is Congressman Schwerbitz, and Congressman Schwerbitz is from South Dakota. And I think you'll find it interesting to just give a listen to one of the more memorable moments of my radio career when Congressman Schwerbitz joined me April 1 last year. Congressman, welcome, sir, to Philadelphia.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Smerconish. I must tell you that this is a very significant piece of legislation.
Exactly does Schwerbitz Donaldson seek to do?
Well, House Bill number 3947J, which is still pending in the House, by the way, should be up for a vote within 2 weeks. That is it, right after Easter recess. It would require by federal law the use of a respiration apparatus by all of us that would reduce carbon dioxide pollution by 1/2.
And well, that sounds noble, but how would it get it done?
Because the reason for it is that the latest figures made available to us is very shocking. The world's leading ecologists indicate that we've got a maximum of 21 years of good air left on this earth, and our currently increasing rate only 21 years. And we all know that people are a major source of air pollution because we exhale carbon dioxide 24/7. So our bill makes it mandatory that everyone wear a special nose device to cover one nostril with every nose. But this is the right. We would all naturally exhale only half as much carbon dioxide. In addition, obviously, we'd only inhale half as much oxygen. And
in other words, Congressman, what you're saying is that because of a limited supply of good oxygen, you want to limit the ability of Americans to breathe through both nostrils.
Well, that's one way of saying it, but I don't exactly go along with it that way. I think we all have to sacrifice something in this regard because we certainly want to live more than 21 years. You see, the increasing rate is the result of our using more of it and the population explosion and everything else. There's so many reasons why this is growing at such a rapid rate. And our scientists, the world scientists agree that there is no way that they can come up with a plan to alleviate this major problem in the space of 21 years. And they figure that 42 years, the possibility is reasonably strong. So that's what we want to do. We want to extend to 21 years of good air over a 42-year period.
The device that you are talking about, is it an unsightly thing? In other words, Congressman Schwerbitz, if I were to have the device right now in one of my nostrils, would you, sir, in looking at me, be able to discern that fact?
Oh, yes, of course, because it's a cone-shaped device, very simple. And you put it in your nose, and it fits all noses because it's cone-shaped. And if you have a small nostril, it goes up not so far, and if you have a large nostril, it goes up further. But it's a very small thing.
But would you see it? I mean, is it like...
Yes.
In other words, you'd know that I had the device.
Oh, everybody in the world would be needing to wear one of these things, so it wouldn't be noticeable on you any more than anybody else.
So Congressman Schwerbitz was concerned. He introduced Donaldson-Schwerbitz because the oxygen supply is limited, so we're all going to block one nostril. Therefore, we're going to preserve oxygen. Now it's time to go to the phones. Now, I have to tell you, like every other talk show host, I believe that I have the smartest listeners who are out there. Bill mentioned I had the pleasure of guest hosting for Bill O'Reilly, and it's so funny because after I did that, I came home and had this debate with my father as to whether my real listeners in Philadelphia were smarter than the O'Reilly listeners, and of course I concluded that they were. Now, this caller who comes in for Congressman Schwerbitz, he may make you think otherwise. On a cell. Hi, David.
Hey, Michael, how are you?
Good.
Listen, I'm a long-term listener and a first-time caller, but I like to think of myself as one of your brighter listeners. I'm a long-term listener and a first-time caller, but I like to think of myself as one of your brighter listeners. And I have a comment about the Congressman's proposed bill.
Congressman Schwerbitz?
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct. I think it's very indicative of the selfish attitudes that we're seeing in America today.
Well, then why do you say that? Because I thought he was trying to preserve an O2 supply for my kids.
Well, if you were listening, especially in the beginning of his comments, he mentioned that in South Dakota, their population is very low, and they have more than enough air.
Right.
And it's my opinion, rather than inconveniencing the rest of the country, if not the world, that we should look at states like that that have a surplus of air and go in and take it if we have to. They're not willing to share it. Certainly after the conflict in the Middle East, we'll have the manpower to do such a thing.
I was ready to blow my brains out at this point. Thank you, my smart callers all calling. Anyway, perhaps you didn't know this, but Congressman Schwerbitz joins us, came in from South Dakota, and I want to welcome Congressman Schwerbitz to the... And Congressman, I'm told that perhaps you brought with you one of the Donaldson-Schwerbitz devices that will now become mandatory.
It's actually Schwerbitz-Donaldson. A lot more in organizing that particular bill than he did. In fact, his contribution was very small. I do happen to have one of those devices that you were referring to. This is one that was manufactured in China. And it's only 22 cents, by the way. Well, that's pretty cheap, but for those of you who think we shouldn't be going to China for these nose devices, there are people in the United States now developing machinery that will do the work of 20 Chinese people at one time. But this is the nose device that I was talking about, the one that was made in China. I also have a designer one with me.
Is it left or right? Is it one size fits all, I guess is the question I was going to ask. By the way, when you be in the Philadelphia area, this coincidentally, April 1st, so that we can learn more about the Schwarbitz-Donaldson bill.
Coincidentally, yes, because I have relatives here, so I'll probably be visiting them, so we'll be here. So anybody, I guess, who wants to hear the same thing over again.
It's funny, I told the congressman, I thought this year that he needed to make an appearance on March the 31st, but he was insistent that it be April the 1st, so we have our work cut out for us, but we'll see what happens.
Okay, would you like to try this?
No. I'm going to pass.
Want me to put it on?
If you choose to, go ahead.
I have it in there now.
Now, I can tell you this, there's absolutely no feeling, because I've worn this many times, so I'm used to it. Other people might take a little time to get used to it, but for me it was very, very simple. But everybody gets used to these things very quickly, and it's important that we all do, because the entire world has to wear one of these nose devices and save the air. Otherwise, we won't be dead in 21 years, and I don't think there are too many people. And by the way, to go to, instead of 21 years, to be 42 years, it's not even going to help me, because actually I probably will be dead before 42 years anyway. So I'm doing this selfishly. As you
Thank you very much, Congressman. Any questions I can answer by? Yes, sir.
Yeah, Paul Norton has a question.
Michael, you do appear to attract opinions. Congressman Schwarbitz, and I got a call a couple of days ago from Herb Homer.
Where do I know that name?
Your friend and mine. I don't know if he's your friend, but he called me up. He's had a quadruple bypass, and he was thinking of getting an ambulance to bring him here to hear you, because he had two questions, which I am deputized to ask you. The first question is, since you represented the Faulkner family, why is Mumia Abu Jamal still alive? And the second question is, are you still throwing tomatoes at Ira Einhorn's statue?
No. Would you believe that Grace can attest to this, that after we had 2 killer tomato contests, 2 or 3,
Right.
they were moderate successes. They were always the hottest nights of the summer, and the premise was grow a tomato in your garden, and then join us in Manayunk, where we'll have a billboard-size portrait of some bad character, and we'll throw tomatoes at that person's picture. And Ira Einhorn, I guess, was 2 years the victor. We got a letter from lawyers out in California telling us that people who own, only in America, people, and I should say this, I'm a lawyer, but people who own the name Killer Tomatoes were objecting to the Killer Tomato contest. I couldn't make this up. Asked us to refrain and wanted a piece of the profits as if there were some. I felt like sending them half the tomatoes. You know?
Box up the remains and ship it.
The answer to the other question is I guess, a more serious question. A federal judge in Philadelphia wrote a really terrific opinion about that whole case. And by now it's been 18 months since he did so. It's several hundred pages long. He closed the door on any factual questions that could forever be raised about it. It's only the penalty that's now in doubt. My prediction is that, like the rest of us, it'll be a death of natural causes. They finally take that fellow, but he doesn't get out of prison in any stretch of the imagination.
A former radio personality.
No comment.
Yeah, Joe.
My couple of questions. First of all, when is the final vote on the Schwarbitz bill?
It'll be April 2nd, because that'll be the reason for having him on April 1st.
Secondly, how long did it take you to finish off personally the 3.5 kegs?
Actually, I took them back to that freshman hall where no one had wanted to come to the affair because they were all watching the ball game, and they enjoyed them while watching the Phillies. It was a great Phillies party, is the way it ended.
On a more serious note, how about the obscenity situation with Howard Stern? How do you feel about that and broadcasting?
Joe, last night, I was coming home on the train from the Pentagon yesterday. I got a phone call from CNN. About once a week, I will do one of the evening shows. And they said to me, will you talk about the effect of talk radio in this year's election. And I said, well, sure, that's right up my alley. As a matter of fact, I'm on my way home from the Pentagon. This is part of the White House outreach to the talk radio community. Not only was I able to interview Donald Rumsfeld today, but last week or last month it was Colin Powell. And so we have this whole pre-interview. And they say to me in the course of it, oh, by the way, we may want to also throw Howard Stern into the mix. I said, why? And they said, because he's vehement in his opposition to the president. But the premise of this segment that I was supposed to do on national television last night was the effect of talk radio. Well, we came on the air at the Paul Mazan show. It was the lead subject. And I made my comment, which now will answer your question, which is that I think that the industry needs to clean itself up. I think that he's a talented broadcaster, but I think that the industry needs to clean itself up. It's nice to know that there are some rounds of applause here today, because there sure weren't last night when I said these things. There was a woman who was on with me who did a full frontal assault on me as being a conservative, wannabe, talentless, no ratings, no revenue to speak of broadcaster. And that was her retort to me saying, we should clean up the industry, and I think that he's misguided in going after the FCC in the way that he is. It's a hot issue, but those are my views on it. Yeah, good.
Number one, listen to you and Dom. I have to, in my apartment house, Kennedy House, I have to go from receptacle to receptacle. We have such bad electricity, so I have to keep adjusting. Number two, are you on 5-second delay at all, or have you been? And number three, I tried to get your passion show. That must have been one of the biggest for you.
You mean the movie?
Well, have you talked about it? Are you talking?
No, I did it extensively before it came out, and right on the day that it came out, I went and saw the movie, talked about it that day, and have not gone back to the subject.
Was that one of your biggest callings?
It's hard to determine which is bigger than the next. I mean, I think that we're fortunate that every day there's a great call volume. I try and I block those calls out of my mind, because if I were to come in tomorrow at 6 a.m. and say abortion, or say handgun control, they'd all light. I don't know that it means that I'm doing good radio. So one of the hardest things for me, because, especially with my political background, it's hard for me to look at those phone lines as something other than an instant referendum of how you're doing.
Do the people that call in, do they read your column also, or do you find
Some seem
separate
to,
audience?
some seem not to. It's really a hodgepodge, and what I'm proud of about the radio station is that I think that the breadth of the callers, the different types of backgrounds that they seem to come from, and the different demographics that they represent has really, really grown. One of the things about DB when I was there at the end was that we really controlled a particular section of the market, but not much beyond that. This station still needs to grow, but I think that all of the building blocks are there now, and the signs are good that we're reaching a lot of different audiences. I don't know if that answered your question. Yeah.
After your Newtown Square story, is anyone at Channel 10 speaking to you?
Well, talk about an uncomfortable situation. We're in the NBC 10 building.
Yeah, and you're out of there at 9.
We're in the NBC 10 building, and when I arrive, I'll hold the door for Steve Levy, or he'll hold the door for me, and we'll exchange pleasantries running to the men's room during our respective commercial breaks. But that's pretty much all that I have to do with NBC 10. Now, they went out to Delaware County, and they pulled this stunt. I mean, that's my view of it. And I've talked about it extensively. They essentially lured pedophiles into a bedroom community 0.4 miles away from a Catholic grade school, and then aired the tape of that on the final night of sweeps. And I've been pretty strong on that case. I just think that it was outrageous what they have done. But it's very uncomfortable, because at 7:30, we're all broadcasters. You get into these routines. My routine is that at 7 a.m., not 7:30, 7 a.m., like a bat out of heck, I am out the door, down to the commissary to grab a fresh cup of coffee, and then back into my, my little hole of a studio. And that's the only time of the day where I have to pass folks from NBC 10, and it's noticeably chilly in the air as I run for my coffee, since I've had these things. What am I going to do? It's chilly everywhere I go. It comes with the territory. That's the truth.
Michael,
Yeah,
you forgot to finish the story, the sequel. After they said, I want to talk to your father from the chlorine company, did you get fired?
Oh, heck no. No. And Larry was great about it, and I ribbed him about it all the time. Yes, sir. In the back, and then you. Go ahead.
Michael, I'm just going to go back to your white lights. When I was a kid, I grew up, my grandfather, we had the big bulbs. And then for a number of years, the white lights. Well, this year I got crazy. White lights and colored lights.
Ah!
And CBS, before the season, went 50% off. So I've got a ton of lights that are still up now. And every time I would go in there, people would comment about your show concerning the white lights. Somebody wherever I was would say something. Oh, we heard about white lights versus color. I said,
That's funny.
I'm going to mix them all up.
There has to be something more that I can do with that next winter season. I'm going to think about it. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious, you go back far enough in talk radio in Philadelphia to have a perspective on this question. But let me start by saying when you talked about your early exposure on TV and the other station and so forth, this condition is not the case. The condition being, and the question is, why is it that so much of talk radio today has evolved into one conservative advocate after another? So much so when they're now making plans to start a so-called liberal alternative voice on what used to be the old WIBG of 990 to start sometime next month. It's happened imperceptibly, but if you look at it in the context of what was when you were starting to what it is today, particularly the syndicate.
If I think about
why is that?
If I think about where it was at DB when I first came aboard, I'm thinking now out loud about the lineup. Paul W. Smith, more conservative than liberal, but not a vitriolic kind of guy. Irv was always hard to place on an ideological spectrum. It depended on the issue. Frank Ford, a liberal, clearly a guy who was liberal. Bernie Herman, the gentleman of broadcasting. I never thought of Bernie as being a guy ideologically, on one side or the other. So I guess I'm agreeing with you that at that time there was more of a disparity of viewpoint. I think that people who are, and I don't approach this as if I need to be conservative on this particular issue or liberal on that particular issue. As a matter of fact, I probably have more success because of what you say if I did take more of a doctrinaire approach to some of these issues. It distresses me sometimes to think about, that's what appears to work the best. Why is it the case? I think that because people who are conservative perceive the media to be liberal, have sort of charted out talk radio as being their territory in the same way that Fox News is their territory. They feel comfortable there, and that's what they tune in for. I don't think that there's any intended effort to keep liberals away. I think that Grace would hire someone who could get ratings and revenue regardless of their political stripe and their party and so forth. And that's why I don't think this March 31st effort is going to be successful. So I guess I'm saying I don't think that it's deliberate. I think that it's a response to the perception of the hardcore talk listener that the remainder of the media is more liberal than they would like, and they're comfortable here. It's almost like a clubhouse. It's almost like a gathering place for like-minded individuals on political matters. That's the best answer I can offer, even though I've been asked it many times.
Did you introduce Grace?
Grace Blazer is I made reference to her as the program director of our radio station. Final question or two?
All right, I want one quick one.
Go ahead.
Who's going to win the November election?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that, Bill, but I'll tell you this, because I have been around now for a while. I've been through, I think this will be my fourth presidential cycle where in some role I'll be on the air in a position to talk about it. Never 8 months out have I seen the hostility and the viciousness that exists. And frankly, although I can sustain a conversation on certain of these subjects, truthfully, I'm sitting there and I'm saying, oh man, I don't feel like doing this for the next 8 months. Believe me, when I arrived at the Wawa at the foot of Belmont Hills this morning at 3:50, and I looked down at the Philadelphia Inquirer and I saw that MTV was not coming to town, because the unions had kept them away. I nearly shouted out loud, because what it meant was that the critical hour of my program today, the 7 o'clock hour, would be an hour that I'd get to talk about something other than John Kerry's commercial, George Bush's commercial, and so forth. We'll go ahead, one more, right here. Yeah.
You had mentioned your opinion is that radio does need to clean itself up and we need to get rid of the indecency. What, in your opinion, really sparked this? I can't believe that Janet Jackson doing what she did.
You mean the backlash?
Well, no, in general, I can't believe that Janet Jackson doing what she did was the catalyst to this whole thing. I think they've just been waiting for this opportunity, but why now? Does it have anything to do with the elections coming up?
I don't see conspiracy in this sort of thing. I think that Clear Channel, who removed Howard Stern, is hypocritical because they rang the cash register for a lot of years by having him on those 6 stations. And they were being called before the Congress. And I think it was the threat of what would happen when they got there. They had the incident where someone said something that should have been flagged and it wasn't flagged. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think the pendulum swings in this country. The combination of what we see on MTV, what we see on network television, the Janet Jackson thing, the music, people have had enough. Listen to the sentiment of the folks in this room. Then came that incident, and I think it was sort of an opportunity for people to say, yeah, I've had enough of that as well. It is a privilege for me to be here. And by the way, I met Bill Weber at the Village Fair in Doylestown, where he was making a personal appearance.
What year?
And I won't embarrass either one of us. And he showed up, and here was the game. Who can eat a pack of saltines and whistle? You're looking at him. I got a huge Tootsie Roll. So combination of the Tootsie Roll and the chlorine, and now you know why I'm a broadcaster.
Smerconish, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Michael. We appreciate that. Pat Delsey, I just want to mention, he's asked me to thank all of you for the kind words. Pat's 45 days away from a cabbage situation, and he's well and fine and lost some weight and doing real well. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. I have a granddaughter who's half Irish, and all of you wearing green. It's so nice to see all of you. Congressman Schwerbitz wants me to remind you that there's a copy of his interview on a CD on the table as you go out. You're welcome, anyone, to pick up. That, of course, is Les Roz, our member here at Broadcast Pioneers. Please pick up as you leave. And it's so nice to see Reggie LeVon. Did you see Reggie just got up? I know a lot of you know Reggie LeVon from broadcasting. I hated his guts because he's got the wildest voice in the world. I don't know if you've ever heard him on the air, but he's fantastic. And he and I sort of reminisced that 45 years ago we were on WRCB together. So that was a while back. But again, thank you all for coming.